5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to today's meeting of the Transportation Licensing Commission. If you'll please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pursuant to the provisions of Section 2.68.030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, notice is hereby given that if you're not satisfied with the decision made by the Metropolitan Transportation Licensing Commission, you may appeal the decision by petitioning for a writ of certiorari with the Davidson County Chancery or Circuit Court. Your appeal must be filed within 60 days of the date of the entry of the Metropolitan Transportation Licensing Commission's decision. We advise that you seek your own independent legal advice to ensure your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements have been met. Prior to today, Mr. Fields circulated last month's draft minutes. Have the commissioners had an opportunity to review the minutes?
Yes.
Is there a motion regarding approval?
I'll move the minutes be approved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We have a public hearing, a continuation of a public hearing today. We've been asked to review a proposal and a request, proposal regarding how to request for a SUMD vehicle increase and decrease. Come up with a process for that. Mr. Fields?
Yes, sir. If you recall, in the last couple of meetings, we've had opportunity to have presentations made by our vendor partners to describe what the process could look like. You've had questions, so they've gone back and believe they've responded to those questions, and they're present and ready to talk about what they've sent to you that I think they shared directly with you, and you have today.
All right. All right, just so we're clear, this is a continuation of our public hearing from last month, so if there are others in the audience who do want to address this issue, if you'll just please let us know, and you'll also have an opportunity to speak. But I'll guess I'll turn it over to Mr. Reed. Am I safe to assume you've been appointed as the spokesperson?
Yes.
All right.
I have drawn the short straw once again. Anyway, great to be with you all again today. As Billy had teed up and as the chair teed up, this is just a continuation of our discussion from the last two meetings about what is a requirement under the RFP legislation that was passed. In fact, I was looking at this date. It was passed all the way back in 2019, actually late April of 2019. And then we went on, obviously, a sort of a year-long RFP process, which obviously had some delays given what we've all been experiencing for the last 2 years. But just as a reminder, I think this is sort of the last piece of business, really, that this commission needs to take up, that is sort of required under the that legislation and then the subsequent RFP process. Obviously, it was signed the contracts, decided on initial fleet sizes. The last thing really is how do we determine whether or not companies are due an increase or a decrease in scooters. And again, we've had now 2 rounds of discussion, gotten feedback from a lot of you all, very, very helpful feedback, and now we've sort of put in front of you what I would describe as kind of a kitchen sink proposal that I think gives this board all the leeway that it needs in order to determine whether or not a company is able to get a fleet increase or not. Just quickly, I wanted to this was referenced the last time by Ms. Castonas, but the language in the actual enabling legislation itself that says future post-RFP increases in a specific operator's SUMD fleet size shall be determined by the MTLC based upon reasonable and objective criteria to be developed by the MTLC, including but not limited to an operator's ability and willingness to achieve the goals of this chapter. That chapter then lays out 17 goals, I'm not going to go through them, but I think you all are quite familiar with them. They're all about really all the ways that we partner with the city, including regular meetings and partnering on safety messaging, equity, around special events, innovation. So all safety, all the things that you would expect, and all the things that I think that we are doing. So again, so I've tried to incorporate that along with sort of this notion of public necessity, right? I think everyone on this committee, I think, has a sort of feeling about whether or not we will have adequately made our case that we should be able to be granted either a fleet increase or not. I think building in that sort of more subjective public necessity whereby we would have, public hearings, they're noticed. I mean, I've been to the last several meetings, there's certainly been a lot of public input around, increases or decreases to other types of vehicles. And so I think that's, part of what this committee can use to determine whether or not a company is worthy of an increase. And then the last piece that we've added as well is a deployment plan. So we'll come to you and say, hey, look, we want to deploy 50 additional scooters. We meet all of the objective criteria. We will, put forth sort of our subjective reasoning as to why, we should be allowed. And then we will also tell you where they're going to go. So that we have to equitably distribute the increased fleet throughout the city so that they're all not going to end up, obviously, on Lower Broadway. And part of your approval will be predicated upon us telling you where they're going to go, and then obviously the city with Billy, the IT staff, and the new folks that are still to be hired that have the access to all of that data through Populous. And so, rather than me reading all through this again, I think we're quite familiar with it at this point. But yes, the idea would be that we would be able to come to you as no more frequently than every 3 months to ask for an increase of up to 50 scooters, and then you all, using this sort of combination of objective and somewhat subjective criteria, would be able to judge us accordingly. So I'll open it up for any additional feedback and questions, and hopefully we can come to some agreement today. And then I think, right, if this is working great in 6 months, and you all feel very comfortable that we've put a system in place that works, that gives you the discretion that you need, then great. If it's not working in 6 months, then we ought to come back and revisit it.
Do you have another copy of the handout that was given to us?
I just have my copy, unfortunately, but there are a couple more copies there. Yes, and I emailed it to you all.
Okay.
That's right, yesterday. Same thing.
Good, good. I was marking up this one and wanted to have a pristine copy, so, okay.
Here's the letter if that's helpful.
I've got it, thank you.
Ms. Costonas, could you, I would like to hear again, what are the 17 goals that go hand in hand with coming up with reasonable and objective criteria?
Sure, I can read them out loud. So the first is the potential operator's commitment to regularly participate in shared micromobility operational stakeholder meetings, focusing upon operational matters encompassing a wider and more diverse group than the operators, such as outreach and educational group. Second, the potential operator's commitment to address the safety and security concerns expressed by the public regarding the past, current, and future SUMD services, including specific commitments to and experiences with local governments to achieve safe, effective operations. 3, the potential operator's commitment and ability to effectively partner with the Metropolitan government on an ongoing basis for purposes of addressing the continuing needs, concerns, and objectives of the Metropolitan government in regulating SUMDs, including matter of equity, including geographic coverage, affordability, technology, and abilities. 4, the potential operator's commitment to ensuring rider compliance with state and local laws, including but not limited to DUI laws and minimum rider age requirements. 5, the potential operator's commitment to promoting proper and safe use of SUMDs, including use of helmets or other equipment and the provision of safety education. 6, the potential operator's use of staffing, technology, and other means to restrict or prohibit use of SUMDs in restricted areas, including but not limited to sidewalks. 7, the sufficiency of the potential operator's staffing to adequately and timely address A, improper parking of SUMDs on public rights-of-way, public sidewalks, and private property, B, uprighting overturned SUMDs during recognized hours of operation, and C, rebalancing or reallocating SUMDs evenly throughout the city during recognized hours of operation, D, potential violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, or other improper interference with access to public thoroughfares. 8, the response time required by the potential operator to address issues with SUMDs. 9, the potential operator's plans to coordinate and cooperate with the metropolitan government regarding special events. 10, the potential operator's approach to collaborating with the metropolitan government in developing shared expectations and approaches for safety-related management matters such as inclement weather, impaired drivers, equipment, and public education, etc. 11, the potential operator's willingness and ability to conform to adaptive regulations that address changing technologies, evolving markets, as well as risk impacts that vary upon location, time of day, and other variables. The potential operator's willingness and ability to perform within regulatory pilots environment in which the potential solutions are tested under varied circumstances in order to determine best practices and approaches. 13, the potential operator's willingness and ability to work within outcome-based regulations, including performance-based criteria, in lieu of fixed regulations. 14, the potential operator's willingness and ability to comply with risk-weighted regulations adjusted to address measured safety risks faced by members of the public and/or SUMD riders under particular circumstances. 15, the potential operator's willingness and ability to provide pricing and availability options to the riders based upon equity and lower incomes. 16, the potential operator's proposals for addressing sustainability and environmental concerns. And 17, the potential operator's ability to provide the metropolitan government with anonymized and aggregated location data, sharing and open data information regarding SUMD locations, ridership, aggregated 5-trip minimum, SUMD traffic patterns, and other data.
Thank you. Now, I know last month, Ms. Costonos, you had mentioned that the ordinance also provided that as part of the criteria that the commission could decide to employ a similar analysis that it does for the other transportation vehicles that we regulate.
In terms of the sort of public convenience and necessity standard, yes, and it does appear that they haven't attempted to incorporate that into this proposed regulation. The thing that I was kind of looking for last month that I don't see in the draft is I was kind of looking for, and this is entirely up to your subjective decision-making, not mine, but I was thinking because so many of those criteria kind of address like outcome-based or risk-based, performance-based criteria, that the idea would be to use the fleet increases as a way to reward that good performance. And while the first criteria does address the performance of compliance with the current regulations, it doesn't set out any objective metrics for measuring that. And while I understand that some of the things, there's no way to quantify them and they're inherently subjective and therefore they just have to be reasonable, there are some things that maybe with the populace data could be measured. And so you could have some more objective criteria based on that kind of thing in terms of measuring compliance, maybe comparing the various different certificate holders to each other in terms of determining, you know, who deserves a fleet increase and who does not. So that's, like I said, that was something I was looking for more detail around that, like what kind of metrics might be utilized to measure that performance compliance, but that is entirely up to your, you know, it's up to your deference.
can I assume you still haven't hired?
You're a new person, obviously.
We're in the process, trying to
Okay.
get someone hired. Some of the same problems you read about in the media, we
All
have
right.
those same issues.
The same as, so is one of the part of the job description of this person to look at all that data and report it to us, I assume?
Yes.
Okay. So if we want some particular type of analysis, we can ask for it.
Part of the skill set we'd be looking for is someone who would have the ability and background to be able to do that, not necessarily with SUMD specifically, but
Right.
clearly something that would lend itself to that.
Okay.
And possibly a person in that position could be qualified to recommend more specific, objective,
Yeah,
and
sure.
reasonable criteria to you. But I think the idea was that the industry also understands the populace data very well, and maybe they could make some suggestions as to how to do those measurements of the more objective, oriented performance measures.
Is there an easy way to find out, or a hard way, I guess, for what other cities are doing?
We can do some research.
We can do some additional research, and obviously, they probably have answers to some of those
Right,
questions
sure.
right now. I think my impression it's all over the board. There's not a standard. Now,
Right.
again,
It's pretty
I'll-
cutting edge.
I'm happy to speak to that.
Yeah.
If this was the standard that Nashville adopted, it would be by far the most detailed and comprehensive fleet increase metric that I've certainly seen anywhere in the country. For the most part, it's either demand-based, like 2 rides per vehicle, 2.5 rides per vehicle, which we obviously have in here, or it's entirely subjective on behalf of the city officials or a body like yours who would be deemed to judge it. And there are some that every year set an amount, and that's the amount. But they are usually a lot more flexible, and we're not seeing the same sort of level of ridership that we do here throughout the summer months.
And that was the other thing I was gonna ask, 2.5.
I mean, do we just decide whether that's 1 month or 3 months? I mean, obviously, I assume it's not 2.5 in February.
The 30 days prior
Okay.
is what we
Is that what
would
it
propose.
says? Okay.
That was sort of what was understood, and happy to just go ahead and add that, just so we're more specific.
I'm not sure I'm asking for it. I mean, obviously you wouldn't judge it on January or February.
Well, and that's what I was gonna say. I mean, look, this is a standard. If there's concern here, this cannot be abused, right? I mean, this
yeah,
is,
so it's-
at
sure.
worst, if we were to meet all these criteria and you all voted yes every time, we're talking about 50 scooters every 3 months
Right.
maximum,
So
right?
that's
So,
what it was.
Wait, is that 50 scooters per each company?
that's correct, yes.
So 150.
That's right.
Every 3
that's right.
months. What if we did it in a kind of a step-by-step process? And so instead of all these criteria, I mean, I know you probably haven't addressed this yet, but I'm just thinking of like the mechanics. So let's say you come here in 60 days after we adopt something, what you're suggesting, and you've got data showing you're averaging 2.5 rides per day, you've got a plan to equitably distribute, and you're then coming in to make your case that you've been in compliance with the current regs and you're substantially compliant with the goals of the program. It would almost seem like you wouldn't even bother coming in unless you met 1 and 2 for sure. Like objectively, you should be able to show that and just say, here's the data.
Absolutely.
And 3 and 4 gets to be a little more subjective, I guess, because you're having to have the commission decide, yes, you are in compliance and you're meeting the goals of the program. And then you've got this final one, which is really what I want to talk about, because this is the one that I think we need to clarify. Because I think it should probably be the commission decides the community will benefit from the additional fleet rather than burdened by it. So that's kind of like the final hurdle that a company would have to overcome and would give the commission, again, the ultimate discretion to decide, yes, you're going to get additional scooters or you're not. Because there may be some overriding decision that the commission, we as a commission make, that we believe that there wouldn't be a benefit for additional fleet numbers, despite the fact that there may not be an issue with compliance or the fact that you're currently operating within the goals of the program.
Absolutely. Look, if we want to change that language to the TLC determines rather than the company demonstrates, the idea here was that the burden would be on us to prove to you all that we have, that you know, the community will benefit versus the additional would be a detriment, right? And we do that a whole number of ways, right? Obviously, through some objective stuff, but
Right.
I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot that will factor in there. But if you'd rather that be more explicit, that the TLC terms, obviously someone's got to make the ultimate determination after we demonstrate, and that burden is going to fall with the
And I
officer.
only bring that up because I'm sitting here just looking at it, going, okay, well, how does a company demonstrate that on balance the community will benefit? You know, how can you demonstrate that?
Mm-hmm.
And it to me it seemed a bit vague as to what is that standard to show a demonstrative ability to show that the community will benefit, as opposed to just making it crystal clear that this last factor is just a completely discretionary factor that the commission has to decide. There's a benefit here. Let's issue the additional fleet numbers.
I had written, the commission is persuaded that on balance the community will benefit, but I like your language that we decided. And here's why. We may want to take input from other people than the company. We may have the police.
Oh,
come in and talk
absolutely.
to us. So I realize I think we're all in agreement, but the way it's written, the criteria here is that the company can demonstrate. Well, the commission may decide, despite your demonstration, that the police demonstration or some of the public demonstration suggests otherwise.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, I think we're fine with that.
Because it seems like ultimately with the preamble up there, this TLC has to vote affirmatively for any of this anyway.
Exactly, and that was the intent. Well, I appreciate the attorneys on
So you
that.
would be in agreement with the commission decides that on balance?
We would, yes, either that or your language, Vice Chair.
I like his is stronger, so let's go with this.
Let's go with that.
Can I switch to another? I'm concerned about every 3 months having 3 companies coming in here trying to demonstrate that they should be allowed to increase their fleet by 50. We typically are reviewing increases or decreases or changing zones once a year. And we have a public hearing that's set and people can show up. I think it's a heavy burden to put on this commission that every 3 months we may potentially see 3 companies coming in, and then we got to notify the police, we got to, and the public will want to have some input. So why was the decision for every 3 months instead of, say, biannually or yearly?
That's a great point. I think the thinking here is sort of twofold. First, we're starting with this sort of 50 scooter threshold, right, which is very low in terms of our fleet size. It's also, we're responding to dynamic demand changes, and we really want the ability to be able to do that happen throughout the year, right? I mean, our demand outside today for the next 3 months is going to be far, far lower than it will be during the summer. So, I think then we get into, then we got a question around, well, when do we measure the average rides, right? That might throw that metric for a loop. I think this is about our ability to respond quickly to demand and the changing of the seasons. And, again, I think we will develop a cadence whereby this should not become overly burdensome on the TLC or the public. And look, again, I think if this is not working or if this is too overly burdensome, then I think we can look at an alternative. But if we were going to go to biannual or annual, I think we would need to look at both the amount of scooters that would be on the line, and I think we'd need to figure out that ride metric and how we would measure that, because it gets a little bit more difficult if it's a once a year or a twice a year. And I think the other thing is this commission, our contract with the city is for a year. And so we're sort of on a year-to-year basis. I mean, our hope is that we will have demonstrated that we're a good actor and that we're worthy of having our contract renewed by this commission. But, with that comes that uncertainty, right, of us, our employees, our investment. And so I think, having that baseline, understanding that there's a quarterly. I mean, again, generally, all the other markets that I'm in, this is determined at at an administrative level, and we have the ability to do it monthly. And it's just, obviously, this is a little bit more unique because we're in front of a board and we want to make sure we've got public input. I do believe that once we have, the staffing in place at NDOT that's really dedicated to this program, you're going to be getting a lot more sort of, transparent information every month.
So your need is flexibility to go with the ebb and flow of riders. Now, in the lean months, let's say you get some increases. How many? I forget. How many do you have currently?
500.
We're
500,
at 500, that's what we all started with.
And if we do 150 every 3 months, is that 600 more a year? So, okay.
Yes, potentially, but
Yeah,
I mean,
but and likely, because I think you're going to come. So I guess my next question is, what happens to the scooters during the lean months that are that are sitting out there? Is somebody picking them up, moving them off the streets, or what's going on?
yeah, so there will be days of inclement weather where we're not.
I'm talking about weeks.
Weeks.
Like during the winter time when
Our
it's 40
fleet
degrees
size
and
will
humid.
reduce to meet demand, right? So,
Will you be taking them off the street?
yes, sir, yes. And because, don't forget, part of also what you're approving is a decrease metric, whereby if we fall below a certain amount of rides, again, that's a discouragement for us for putting out a bunch of scooters that aren't getting rides, right? So we absolutely do not want to leave our equipment out for weeks at a time when it's not getting ridden in inclement weather. So we absolutely will adjust our fleet size seasonally.
Because potentially, I think it's more realistic than potential. You could be doubling your fleet in 1 year.
We could potentially get an additional 200 scooters,
Yeah, okay. So
one company, so that would be about 40%.
That's right,
by my
600
math.
for all 3 companies.
Yes. And I mean, look, I know what our ride metrics are today. I mean, we're not ready to come and ask for a fleet increase.
If I may, based on my observation over the last several years, assuming that they have to have 60 days in between, but then they also have to have the 30 days at 2.5 rides. The truth of the matter is, there are going to be a lot of months that they're not going to be at 2.5. They're not going to be at 2.5 this month. They're not going to be in December. They're not going to be January or February. The next opportunity, depending on the weather, is March, and more than likely April. Now, I'll
More
look
than
back
likely
at
April.
So the reality is they could come in April, then they'd wait 60 days, they could come back in June. And they're going to meet the 2.5s then.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as it goes along, so my guess is realistically is they could come probably 3 times in real honest to Pete appearance, I think. Based on, I just don't think they could match up the numbers.
Do you think your office will be able to handle and process preparing for these hearings
Well,
3 times a year?
I think the first thing we'd need to do is to be able to look at those 17 things and use that really as the filter, which is what I think the council's intent was when it passed. And assuming that we can look at it, and some of it is very subjective.
As well as the regulations adopted by this commission.
Oh, absolutely. So we look at those 17, then we look at the other things. Now, one of the things that we're now in the process of getting is this daily data. And how are we going to deal, and again, it's no secret as we talk among the industry, is, we do have a lot of violations. Now, they're not and the company owns them because people are dropping scooters in places they shouldn't drop scooters. So part of their daily challenge is to get to that scooter, get it picked up, and get it somewhere else. And making sure, it's like the geofencing. We've learned a lot about geofencing. Geofencing is great if people stop before they get to the fence. But once you can go straight through a geofence for the most part because the motor hasn't stopped. And if you stop them immediately, you're going to throw them over the handlebars. So we have to be very careful on what we do and what we don't do. So we've been working on slow down periods, slow down areas, and those sorts of things. We have issues with corrals that, we need corral usage is pretty low. So what's got to happen is we've got to find ways to work with them and the public to get vehicles off sidewalks and into corrals. We have a lot of corrals. We may not have enough corrals. We may not have them in the right places, because one of the things we want to do is keep them from Broadway. We've got a couple that are down, not on Broadway, but close. It may be we need to start pushing them back a little bit and say, let's don't take you all the way to Honky Tonk Central and park beside. Let's push you back a block. So I think the reality is, as a community, we have to determine, is this a multimodal transportation opportunity that we support, and the council says we do, and the commission has said we do by approving your contracts. So now what are the things that we have to do to make sure it can work? And this is just part, it's part of the framework. Frankly, I'd rather do it annually. It'd be a whole lot easier on me, but, for good or bad, we don't work around what's good for me and not. What we've got to do is work for what makes the system. I see some snickering. You may think that y'all work for me, but I really work for you. And we have to, we just have to find a way forward.
Mr. Fields, going with what you're just saying there, I like the chairperson's suggestion that this be prioritized, with number one being that they can demonstrate 2.5 rides per day, and then and then it sounds like number two to you is, or one of the higher ones is, are they meeting the 17 goals? So.
And other things that are in the ordinance. 17 are part of it. We also have any rules you would have, but number one, absolutely. If they can't walk in with 2.5, there's no reason to come in. And if we can't verify it, then we may be in a position to go back and say, wait a minute, my number's saying 2.4. Chances are the number's going to be exactly the same because they are the same. In other words, they've got to, for lack of a better way, there's a big hose. It comes into the system. Populace gets it. They roll around and give me the things that we can by contract and by certificate get, because we don't get all the information. But we do get the numbers that are going to. We are going to be able to match our numbers by number of rides. We just don't know who's riding, and we don't necessarily by contract. We don't need to know who's riding.
The average number of rides per day. As I'm sitting here, I think I know what that means. But in terms of their current fleet, are we measuring that's a 2.5 rides per day over 500 scooters, or is it just what are deployed?
I think it's 500. In other words, I think for them to come for an increase, and I'm going to look back at
There's no question.
Is you've got to
At our
go
full
500
fleet
times
size.
2.5, and if you're not, it's out there. If each one of your scooters isn't averaging that, then it's on them to get those scooters in the right place to average it. When you look at national numbers, our numbers, we have a phenomenal amount of riders, especially on the weekends during season. The week's a little lighter, but the weekends are really high. There are many cities that have a lower threshold than 2.5. It may be 2, some are 1.5, I think. I don't know that any are 1, but 1.5 or 2, 2.5's on the upper end. If you went to 3, it would be by far the highest in the country, and I'm not saying you should do it. I'm just saying 2.5 is a pretty substantial number based on my understanding of the industry. And again, I defer to them because they are the industry.
What if we added, to your point there, the fleet average metric, rides per day of operation at the company's current maximum fleet size?
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
So, am I calculating this correct, that under your current fleet size of 500, you'd have to demonstrate 1,250
rides per day for the past 30-day period?
I can't do the math that fast in my head, but I trust that you're correct.
500 times 2 is 1,000, plus
Okay,
another
yes.
half is 250. So
That's right.
1,250. Currently, today, if you were in front of me asking for an increase, you'd have to start by showing there was 1,250 rides in the past 30 days.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get an idea of how many rides are occurring or that you're projecting in order to get an increase. So what's the number for the last 30 days?
You know, I should
Just
have
roughly.
come armed with that. I think we're probably hovering right under the 2.5 mark right now, is what I would say. For the last 30 days. I mean, the weather's been pretty good. I mean, it's no secret, right? I mean, this is 500 scooters for a city of Nashville size for 3 companies, a total of 1,500. It's not a lot. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're doing this pilot program, to try to get scooters into some other areas of town that they're not currently in. I mean, we're serving a small part of the city today. And I think, you know, we think about what's going to happen on the East Bank, and you know, we wanted to set ourselves up here for success for many years to come, and to be able to serve other areas of the city that we aren't serving today, right? And so, you know, we can't do that until we until we have some metric by which we can increase or we expand pilot programs.
Could I make a suggestion that may be wrong? Hopefully after we do this a couple of times, we'll learn
Absolutely.
more about it, and it'll be a simpler process. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a learning curve regardless of how we do it.
And since it's your rule, you'll also have to say, you know what, we don't like that, we'll go
Right.
do something different. So you can
Different.
certainly change the rule
Yeah.
midstream, if the noticed and so forth.
Right, especially the frequency. It seems like that's going to bear itself out pretty quickly if we feel like 60 days needs to be 90 days or whatever.
But if there's a demand for their product, we also shouldn't, I mean, we should allow them to grow. I mean,
Right,
if they're
but
a partner.
I understand. That's why I'm like, if,
Yeah.
if we increased it to 90, we'd have to look at maybe bumping up from 50 or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, again, we've got to go back to what the original goal and intent of the council was, is to increase the opportunity for other modes and forms of transportation in Davidson County. And so I think you're right on the money. I mean, y'all are heading right down there, from my perspective, is thinking through to what makes sense and how it makes sense. And then we know, because you've created a lot of rules over the last many years, and we've had to come back and change some of the rules. So, I wish it were. I've always wanted just black and white. It makes it a whole lot easier for everybody if you did or you didn't. But the truth of the matter is, what you do isn't black and white. You're providing, it's about public convenience, it's about necessity, it's about helping change the way people think about transporting themselves around Davidson County. And you're on the forefront of it. Transportation is one of the biggest issues facing the county, and y'all are in the middle of it. And it may be a small part of it, but the truth of the matter is this, and the e-bikes that are coming, as well as the other kinds, whether it's entertainment or transportation, this is critical stuff. I applaud you for the conversation that you're having.
And what Sam is saying, I've done a little research, mostly on e-bikes the last few months. But there are cities, I forget, you know what's in Austin? I mean, it was some ungodly number of scooters.
There was
in
at one
Austin.
point like 8,500 scooters
Right.
in Austin. So just to put a finer point on that, we know what's too many for Nashville, and it was 4,000 with 7 companies that all crowded them around where they thought the demand was.
Right.
You know, if I was coming to you with the same set of objective criteria, asking for 50 more during that, we'd be laughed out of here, right? So I think what we believe is that this very conservative, deliberate metric allows us to find the sweet spot and what's right for Nashville, right? We know it's not that number. We know it's not 4,000 with separate companies, but I think we're 6-7 months into this program now, 1,500 scooters, 3 companies. I think we're all working very well together. I think generally, we get very few complaints, and our ridership is really off the charts. I shared with this commission several months back, certainly with the city, of the top 50 markets in the world. we were number 2 in ridership in Nashville over the summer. So, I mean, that's, that's great. That's less people in cars. That's, more businesses being visited. And, we get an inordinate amount of what we call unmet demand app opens in Nashville, right? Where someone opens the app, looks for a scooter, can't find one, or they find one with a dead battery, which is what happened to me one evening when I was downtown. Found about 5 all with dead batteries until I gave up, right? So, we'd like to be able to meet that demand and work with y'all, like I said, in this sort of very conservative, deliberate way, to slowly grow to a place where we feel that we're both meeting the goals of the program and rider demand while also not putting an undue burden on the city.
When you say we were number 2, what was the measuring stick? Number of
We took
rides or what?
rides per day, and we took the 50 markets that were of, of similar size across the world, and Nashville was number 2 for us.
Of course, that can reflect supply as much as demand.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. And we're restricting
We're
supply.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Reed.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the issue? All right, well, formally then, at this point, we'll close the public hearing, so we can decide.
Just a quick question. Terry, can you remind us of the decrease piece that goes with this?
So basically, the regulations that you're authorized to adopt are supposed to be performance-based, risk-based, all that language that we just read out loud from the 17 criteria. So I don't think it's specifically spelled out anywhere at this point, but you all do have the authority to kind of apply that as a stick as well as a carrot. So, like, you might determine that 2 of the companies are very well in compliance and deserve fleet increases, but one of them is really showing a substantial number of problems. And then you might actually want to have the ability to decrease that company's fleet size. So we would need to write additional regulations to specify under what circumstances that could be done.
But there was a
There was
proposal
a
for
proposal,
that
yeah.
last month,
Yeah.
and I just don't have it with me. I thought it was somebody.
I don't think there was a proposal for that.
I can
Didn't
just
you?
quickly speak to that. Yeah,
Thank you.
it's basically the same in reverse. What
We
we just
just-
discussed, excuse me. I will read it to you.
Thank you.
A company shall decrease their fleet by up to 50 scooters upon an affirmative vote of the TLC, either is not in compliance with the current regulations of the TLC, again, similar to the language, or that they're showing that their current fleet size is over-deployed because the fleet is averaging less than one ride per day of operation. So you have it, and that's an or, that's not an and, right? So you could ding a company either for poor performance or for over-deployment.
Thank you.
And again, I would suspect that would be, boy, we're really having trouble with this company, or there's, lots of complaints coming in around something, or someone's not doing what they're supposed to do, and you would certainly hear about that.
So if we were to prioritize these 5 criteria, I'm able to look over your shoulder and see the order that the chairperson has it. What would that look like? I mean, would we make a regulation that says that you start with showing 2.5 rides per day and then go to the next one?
Would it be appropriate for them to say a rule that if an SUMD company demonstrates and verify whatever it is, 2.5, then the commission may, then the companies may, and then begin the next process?
You mean put it in the preamble?
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't know if I want to necessarily do that because, again, any one of these may necessarily not justify an increase,
Okay.
or may not be so bad that it doesn't justify an increase. If they come in showing that they're averaging 3 rides per day, we may say, well, despite some complaints that have occurred, there's a real need out there.
So something along the line of SUMDs must at a minimum, XYZ, then and something? In other words, like, must meet the top two and?
Or maybe just reorganize them, I don't know.
No,
Yeah.
certainly could.
Yeah. What were you thinking?
I mean, I was thinking that 1 and 2 is something that the companies can show and is kind of well within their control. I mean, the data is the data. You know, we could even change, the company can demonstrate to just saying the data shows that the current fleet is not meeting rider demand because the fleet's averaging 2.5 rides per day or more. And the company obviously will have a plan to equitably distribute the increased fleet. I mean, so those two things to me are the most straightforward criteria for a company to come in and know, okay, well, we've got a prima facie case here to come and before the commission to ask for an increase in fleet size. And then we get into the company being in compliance with current regulations of the TLC and that they're substantially compliant with the SUMD program. And that's, again, the company's burden, but it's going to require effort on the commission's part to determine that they are in fact compliant.
We'd have to make a finding.
Right.
Yeah.
You could put that in the preamble. You could say companies may increase their fleet by no more than 50 scooters upon an affirmative vote of the TLC if the TLC determines that.
Right.
Yeah, except for those first two bullets. Then.
And then the final bullet being, and the commission decides on balance the community will benefit from an additional fleet rather than burdened by it.
Which is the ultimate discretionary one.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm fine with just reorganizing them rather than actually putting something in the preamble which may emphasize that particular
All right.
criteria.
So then it would just be, we'd start by making the third bullet point 1.
And that would be the 2.5 rides.
Right.
Correct.
The
Okay.
5th bullet point would be 2.
Correct.
Wait, goes
The
forward.
the first bullet point would be 3.
Okay.
The second bullet point would be 4, and the fourth bullet point would be 5.
And I think that prioritizes what we would normally consider, in a sense of
We're
knocking them
probably
down. Yeah.
Could you all do that one more time?
So using the same language that was presented with changing maybe the 2.5 rides a bit. So bullet point 1, the company's data, remind me, what is the proper way to refer to the data? Is it the populace data?
I mean, Populous is currently the vendor that's providing that information, but I don't know that it will
Okay.
always be the vendor that's providing that information.
Yeah, maybe not, but if you were to put the TLC data,
Hang on, let me see, I still have the
The
code
Metro
section
data?
open. Let me make sure.
Mr. Reed, when you talk about
Aggregated
2.5
data
rides
or-
per day, what terminology do you use? What name of that data do you call it?
Rides per vehicle per day. I mean, I think in the past we've submitted our own.
Yeah.
Now that's obviously going to be driven by the city's data.
Well, I think we can just probably change it to the company provides objective data that their current maximum fleet is not meeting rider demand because the fleet is averaging 2.5 rides per day of operation.
The data is referenced in 262.020C17. I don't know if that's helpful.
yes it
It
is.
says that they describe it as data provided to the Metropolitan government with anonymized and aggregated location data, sharing and open data information regarding SUMD locations, ridership, aggregated 5-trip minimums, SUMD traffic patterns, and other data.
So it would be,
I think I like
Yeah,
what you-
data, if you were to just use the word data,
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's certainly defined in what it would
The
get.
company provides objective data that their maximum current fleet is not meeting rider demand because the fleet is averaging 2.5 rides per day of operation. And I guess we need to put
In
For the past
30
in the
days.
past 30 days.
In
I don't-
30 days prior.
And I think you also added based on current fleet numbers.
That's correct.
Yeah, right, based on their maximum fleet, maximum authorized fleet is
Okay,
what I
based on
said.
maximum authorized fleet.
Then number 2 would be company, it just worded exactly how it is. Company has a plan to equitably distribute the increased fleet throughout the city. And 3, again, is the first bullet point. 4 would be the second bullet point. And 5 is the fourth bullet point, which we would change to the commission decides on balance. The community will benefit from the additional fleet rather than burdened by it.
But the commission determines, does that work?
Determines that.
Okay, it's no longer gonna.
Now, I know we were talking about how this operates in reverse with a decrease. And so I have questions about that, because I know if we were to just take this and it operated in reverse, it's almost putting a governor on the commission's ability to rapidly decrease for non-compliance by saying, well, we can only take away 50. And so what mechanisms are in place that if there is substantial non-compliance with the regs and the ability of the commission to come in and say, look, you're suspended.
Suspended, yeah.
Yeah, let me look at the, I'm sorry, let me pull up the regulations.
Especially since they're under contract.
There you go. Do a search for.
Is that under here, maybe?
I see that improper parking, it says improper parking is a violation that may be cited and may be subject to a civil penalty and/or disciplinary action. And then after notice in a hearing, the MTLC may take disciplinary action, including revocation, suspension, reduction of fleet size, or probation against any certificate holder who willfully fails to comply with this ordinance, any other provision of the Metropolitan Code, or any other applicable law. MTLC staff is authorized to take any temporary action until a hearing is held. That is.
Where is that?
That's in the SUMD I'm not sure that's in front of you. It's
Okay.
in the SUMD regulations, which are on the website, and that particular section, wait, I just lost it, is,
What's that provision number?
I think
Just
it's
get into
080I. Section 050I, sorry,
These are the regulations that you adopted.
in August.
Well, then maybe we need to have something in here when we're talking about decreasing the fleet size, because, I mean, practically, I don't know how often that's going to happen, because the companies, presumably, it's in their interest to not deploy as many scooters as, if demand's not there, they're not going to overly supply the streets.
So, I mean, according to the current regulations, you would have to give them notice in a hearing that
Right.
concerns about their compliance are coming up. But if we're going to have this quarterly meeting anyway to analyze that, you could amend those rules to provide, or at the quarterly meeting, you could also look at that. But there was language suggested in their October 25 email regarding kind of the converse.
Right.
Right. So it sounds like we have two possibilities. One, take an action based upon non-compliance or complaints, and then the other one looking at data to determine whether there should be decrease because of lack of ridership and or because of non-compliance.
Yes, so you can diminish
So
the
there's
fleet
two
size
ways.
as well, but if that's not strong enough action, you also have this ability to hold a hearing and revoke or suspend. Plus, as Mr. Reed pointed out, it's annually reviewed anyway. So every year you're going to determine whether they are entitled to a new certificate of convenience and necessity.
I think to make it just clear as to what the rule is, if we're going to allow a mechanism for a decrease of fleet size, kind of employing these factors in reverse, I think the section needs to say, notwithstanding, this section does not limit the commission's ability to employ, measures under 0.050I or.
Okay, I can put that in. One sec. Sorry, my typing's still slow with my broken finger.
Mr. Fields, while she's doing that,
Okay.
will you be able to verify the average number of rides per day?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the company may come in with information and you'll have the data to be able to verify it?
What'll happen is we'll confirm their data.
Yep.
When they make the one thing we will do is, as we go forward, if they make a proposal and we'll make sure our data matches. Because if it doesn't, that means there's another problem. And, I don't anticipate that. So far, we've in just general tests, they seem to be matching. But we'd be doing that, and then be able to provide, data. For instance, if there's certain things the commission wants to know, we're going to be able to report that back to you. So I would encourage you, if you have specific things you want to see in a dashboard, for instance, there will be a dashboard that is being created where you're going to be able to look straight at numbers. And so, okay, this is what's today or this month or however it ends up looking. So we're going to be in a better place today than we were the first time you started looking at SUMDs a few years ago.
All right, well, would anyone like to make a motion regarding these measures that we're discussing?
Do you want me to read what I have?
Good, that's what I was going to ask. I was going to
Just to make
suggest.
sure we're not missing anything. Okay, so so we're reading the text of this with the edits that we just talked about making. All right, so companies may increase their fleet size by no more than 50 scooters upon an affirmative vote of the TLC if and then the first criteria is going to be company can demonstrate that their current fleet is not meeting rider demand because the fleet is averaging 2.5 rides per day of operation over the last 30 days based on current maximum authorized fleet numbers. And the second one would be company has a plan to equitably distribute the increased fleet throughout the city. And the third one would be the data shows that company is and the data shows is added. Company is in compliance with the current regulations of the TLC with regard to scooter operations, responsiveness, and other compliance measures that may be adopted from time to time by the TLC. The next one is, again, I added the data shows that company has been substantially compliant with the 17 goals of the SUMD program as defined in BL 2019-106. I think that's actually 109. Let me correct that number reference. Section 2C attached. Then the next one will be commission determines that on balance the community will benefit from the additional fleet rather than, I guess, be burdened by it. And the last thing will be, the company shall not be eligible for a fleet increase if it was granted a fleet increase of 30 or more scooters by the TLC within the last 60 days. And then the final thing we added was, this section does not limit the TLC's ability to implement Section 050I of the regulations. Did I get everything?
Well, there could be a decrease up to 50 if for some reason they're not averaging 2.5 rides per day based on their maximum fleet numbers.
Okay, where do you want me to put that?
Wait, I thought we had a proposal last
Yeah.
time that it was one
Is it
ride per
one
day.
ride per day?
2.5.
Yes,
Yeah,
there was
one
a
ride.
Yeah,
proposal.
the proposal from last time wasn't necessarily just a reverse of this that we have in front of us today. It was,
Commissioner Warren was pointing out
Yeah.
the October 25 email from Mr. Reed had a section that said companies shall decrease their fleet by up to 50 scooters upon an affirmative vote of the TLC if either company is not in compliance with the current regulations of the TLC with regard to scooter operations, responsiveness, and other compliance measures that may be adopted from time to time by the TLC, and has failed to correct those errors within a reasonable time frame, or a showing that their current fleet is overdeployed because the fleet is averaging less than one ride per day of operation.
and isn't that where we wanted to put the language at notwithstanding?
So that is
Right.
not in this one that was handed out today.
Correct.
But that was in a prior proposal.
But what you're suggesting is we would add another
Yes.
section that says notwithstanding, and then use their basic language.
Yeah.
All right,
From-
Or
let me
put the
find that.
notwithstanding language in the
Yes.
decrease
In
numbered
yes.
section. So there's going to be two sections. Since it isn't, like you said, just a reversal of the factors. That for one, you would have to be showing that they're not even meeting one ride per day.
Could, may I have, Mr. Chairman, to the, Mr. Reed? Want to make sure, so what we're talking about obviously is we have the section that they've just read aloud, and then we'd be referring back to the October 27th letter, I think.
That's
that-
correct.
that- So we would
Looking for
actually add, was it 28? Well, anyway, that
October
particular, that would
25th?
have the language that would talk about a decrease, a potential decrease.
Sure.
And the way I would interpret that is, if you're failing to reach one a day, and then if you're failing to meet the regulations as stated, which really is what's in the top part of the increase, if you're not meeting, if you're failing to meet those goals that are steps in the increase, and you're actually going below and below, that would give the commission the,
Oh, 'cause Sam said that
even though they already have
he didn't
stated
follow.
ability in the law to do it, that would give them very specific,
I didn't get it.
language to react. Is that,
Let me see
Sir,
if
I
can
think
just type
the
it
vice
out.
chair, yeah, I think that's all correct. I think the vice chair's made a good point, right? This is only up to 50. What if there was something really egregious going on, right?
And we were suspending you.
We needed
Yeah.
to revoke a company's permit for just total noncompliance. That, I think the notwithstanding language would maybe be a third bullet there under the decrease that would say notwithstanding that the TLC reserves the right to be able to, for an egregious violation, call us to a hearing and potentially revoke a company's permit. This I would imagine would operate much more in, boy, a company is had a bad couple of months with complaints, or they've fallen significantly behind on this demand threshold, and we need to punish them with a 50 scooter decrease rather than we need to get them off the street type violation.
And I realize that wasn't really on the table today,
We'd not really discussed,
Yeah.
there hadn't been a whole lot of controversy over that.
but since
particular-
we're here and we've got it in front of
Let's
us, just so we're very clear, the first bullet point of your October email talked about a non-compliance. And then it had the word "or" in there, not "and." Or if you fell below one ride per day, and then we're gonna add the language of notwithstanding,
Yes, sir.
okay.
Okay, but let me, I don't have this in
Right.
typed form, so I'm gonna have to type it in, and then I'm gonna ask you all to read that back to me.
Would it be better to put that on for next?
Well, let me ask this, because I have another question. I mean,
Yeah.
are we just creating more complexity when it's not really needed, when we're talking about decrease of fleet size? Because is the criterion for us to decide because I don't really see this as a punishment. Decreasing the fleet size is not, I mean, I think punishment would fall under 050I, like you are not in compliant with the current regulations, you're not in compliant with the contract that you have with the city.
With our current vendors, when we first started the scooter operations in Nashville, and we did have 4,350 scooters on the streets, we clearly had people putting scooters that absolutely had no possibility of them meeting one a day. We knew it, they knew it, they all knew it, we watched it. They, over a period of time, attrition, basically, a couple of them one of them just left without a whole lot of notice. And then we went through the other process. It was pretty clear that the council anticipated that there was a certain need. Is the need 1,500? Yep. Probably. Could it be a little more? Probably at times. And I think that's the reason they gave the commission the ability to raise it up and bring it down. But the other side, the real world parts of this, and again, I'll have to defer back to because it's their industry, not mine, but I sometimes feel like I'm in the middle of it, is if they've got 500 scooters and they know that their scooters are averaging, say in December, we're not going to find 1,500 scooters deployed every day in Davidson County. It's not going to happen. They won't put them. It costs money to put them out. Therefore, they're going to put out. They'll start looking at numbers. They've got history in the city, so they know in December they're going to need. And I'm going to make a number of 225, 250 scooters a day, and that's all they need. They know they've got strategically. They know where those rides are going to be, and they're building history. The longer they're in Nashville, the more they're going to know that. So the truth of the matter is, they'll push them up and pull them down, not taking them out of the fleet completely, but basically taking them off the street. To go to the warehouse and such. Because one of the problems we had early on is, as I was looking at numbers, I said, why are there 100 scooters at, 1407 B Street? And I said, Billy, that's our warehouse. So we have learned. And we know where the warehouses are. We still have a couple of issues with a bridge or two in Nashville, but that's a whole different story that I have fun harassing them over. But it could be, I get the idea. Sometimes we have rules and we don't have both ends of it.
Well, that's my point. Is do we need to have a rule on decreasing?
Email, except I don't. Could you all repeat the language of the notwithstanding clause you wanted to add?
Well, that's my question. Is like, do we need to have a provision talking about decreasing the fleet size when we already have? If we're going to decrease a fleet size because they're not in compliance, we've already got a rule.
We've got authority to do that.
And we have authority to do
We
that.
do have to provide them with notice in the hearing, though.
Well, are you saying with this rule we don't have to provide notice in a hearing? We just do it?
I would think best, kind of due process would be to do that anyway. But, it may be that, in terms of advance notice, like if you're going to have a quarterly meeting anyway, at the quarterly meeting, you could look at, it would be presumed that you could look at fleet decreases, but not that you could revoke or suspend or assess a civil penalty.
As a licensee, they have certain administrative rights.
Right. I don't think we can just
Right.
decrease. Now, I think we could come up with a rule, and if the data shows, oh yeah, their fleet size, they're 600 and they're only deploying 300 and they don't need 600 anymore, I guess we could lower it to 550 under that criteria.
Well, and I think it also would give you, when they come in for an increase, we're going to have that data.
Right.
And I'm confident, look at the end of the table and say, Ms. Fields, can you please tell me their ridership for the last 90 days by week, by such and such and so on? So what's the average of this? What's the average of that?
Right.
And then can you tell us if for instance, one of the things I anticipate doing is creating zones of sort. So we're going to be able to say in this area, in these areas we're seeing this kind of ridership, in these areas, because we originally talked about zip codes, being able to follow by zip codes the kind of riderships, because we are going to have to determine equity and what makes sense, because part of this is making sure that all parts of this community where there is a need, again, we can debate whether it's this area, but we want to make sure that people aren't shut out on the front end of it, we got to find that equity spot. So that's another issue we've got, but we're going to keep going. So you make a good point. You can decrease with notice. You can decrease whenever you want to decrease, down to 500. Now beyond that, I'm going to look back at legal. I don't know because of contracts and such. We may have to.
I mean, decreasing below 500 would essentially be a revocation, which you also have the authority to do under the disciplinary provision.
Can I make a suggestion that we keep it simple and stick with the proposal that was in front of us today, and we can take up later on consideration of a rule regarding decreasing?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I second the rule to keep it simple.
We have some further discussion going on back here and some additional thought there.
That was kind of scary to see that going on over there. I knew something else was coming up. What is it?
We would, yeah, I think if we're going to start adding language to that decrease, we just want to make sure that there's, some protection. Certainly, for us.
Well, that's why I was referring to the existing rule.
Exactly.
We could just employ that.
I think we're generally comfortable, but if we want to give that one another few weeks to think about, we will come to the table with sort of more comprehensive thought on that. That was, obviously, that was part of our proposal that we sent to you over a couple months ago, so.
And you don't sense an urgency to have a rule for decreasing the fleet size yet, do you?
It's a great point, yes.
Well, it is the winter time coming up.
Yeah, no,
So.
yeah, that's what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
They can always voluntarily decrease it if they want.
My biggest concern is that if you're not getting rider usage, that they're not just sitting out on the streets or wherever. Because one, they can be abused by people who are up to mischief, and then
Absolutely.
two, they can be an inconvenience to folks. And we know the public outcry when there was an inconvenience, when it was unregulated totally.
And it's not just a question of inconvenience, it is a question of disability civil rights.
Well, yes.
Thank you.
Good point.
And there's also an existing rule that's going to require them to have them off the street in a certain number of hours. So in other words, the scooter's not supposed to be static for more than 48 hours in the same location. So what I think I think, and I'm not trying to what we don't want to have is 15 scooters that are set out on Monday morning on 5th and Church, and those same 15 scooters are sitting there on Friday afternoon at 15th and Church. In other words, just to get them out of the warehouse. If they're not needed, they'll stay in the warehouse, is what I think exists with them today. If they have a need, they'll pull them out. If they don't, they're going to leave them in. Is that?
That's exactly right. And I think the fear that we were discussing is that the really low demand times could be used as a, tool to knock our fleet size down significantly over a couple of months, right? And that just wanted to make sure that just based that we were managing properly, that the rule was clear, and that it was not being right. We have to manage our fleet size appropriately during the winter, and that was part of what that discussion was, and making sure that this was not, putting us at a disadvantage as we sort of. I mean, there's some nice days, right, and where we will want to see if there is demand, and there are some where we know there'll be periods of time in February that we will want to bring our fleet size way down.
That's a difficult aspect of being in the Mid-South for your business, is that we can have some beautiful days in February, and then we can have some lousy days.
That's right.
Ms. Gastonis, can I take a crack at actually reading the
Sure.
proposed language? So what the commission's considering is having a rule that says companies may increase their fleet by no more than 50 scooters upon an affirmative vote of the TLC if, 1, company provides objective data that their maximum authorized fleet size is not meeting rider demand because the fleet is averaging 2.5 rides per day of operation or more over the last 30 days. 2, company has a plan to equitably distribute the increased fleet throughout the city. 3, the company is in compliance with the current regulations of the TLC with regard to scooter operations, responsiveness, and other compliance measures that may be adopted from time to time by the TLC. 4, company has been in substantial compliance with the 17 goals of the SUMD program as defined in BL 2019-106, Section 2.
109.
Oh, thank you. It's a typo there. Section dash 109, Section 2C. 5. I guess I should say and 5. The commission, on balance, determines the community will benefit from the additional fleet rather than be burdened by it. Then it goes on to say, a company shall not be eligible for a fleet increase if it was granted a fleet increase of 30 or more scooters by the TLC within the last 60 days.
Can I ask a question about number 5?
And then there was one more thing that I
Oh.
think we were going to add, which was the language, this section does not limit the TLC's ability to implement section 050I of the regulations. Did you still want that?
No,
I don't think.
because that was only if we were going to consider a decrease.
Yeah.
Okay.
On number 5, I think you read it that the commission on balance decides. Do we want the decides after on balance or before on balance?
I think you're right. The commission determines on balance
Okay.
the community will benefit, on and on.
I think everything matched except the one, the first one. Did you have company provides objective data that their maximum authorized fleet size is not meeting rider demand because the fleet is averaging 2.5 rides per day of operation over the last 30 days? Is that the
Yes,
same
yeah,
thing?
well, I said 2.5 rides or greater. I mean,
Or greater.
yeah. Per day of operation over the last 30 days.
Got it.
Well, I would make a motion that we adopt the rule consistent as the chairperson has just read for the companies to be able to increase their fleets,
And Teresa, I took out, like I know you had
the data, yeah.
suggested using data in 3 and 4.
Okay, you did not
I
include that.
took that out.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll mark that out too.
I'll second that motion.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. All right, we've got some other items on the agenda today. Under other passenger vehicles for hire, we've been asked to review new company applications. Mr. Fields?
Yes, we have new applications for Second to None, Achilles Transportation LLC, Levine Industry, Music City Limousine, and Ride with TJ. With your permission, I'd like to ask that you also consider L&M Transport Services LLC. They missed the deadline, but I'm not anticipating your meeting in December at the present time, so I'd like to be able to allow them to go ahead and be ready to work. So it'd be a late item, but they're in the same order that the others are. And I have a copy here if y'all would like to go through it.
Thank you.
That's right.
Everything look in order?
Yes, sir.
Make a motion to approve the applications for passenger vehicles for hire en banc for Second to None, Achilles Transportation, Levine Industries, Music City Limousine, Ride with TJ, and was the last one L&M Transport Services?
Yes. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We've also been asked to review an address change for USA Carriage, doing business as West Haven Carriage Company to 330 Byron Way in Franklin. Mr. Fields?
Anytime a change is made to the face of a application, it has to appear in front of the commission to have it approved. It's just an address change, and it's all in order.
There's no problem with them moving out of Davidson County?
No, sir.
Okay. Make a motion to approve the address change for USA Carriage, doing business as West Haven Carriage Company.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Any other business, Mr. Fields?
No, sir, I do not.
And Mr. Fields alerted me that as of now, it does not appear we're going to have a meeting in December, so I guess I'll see you after the holidays.
The deadline for the agenda will be next Wednesday at noon. We really don't anticipate any. And I spoke to the chair just a few minutes before the meeting. If anything comes in that would be, is normally approved, what I would do is allow them to temporarily operate and then place it before you at the January meeting. If it's something that comes between now and next, that would be, if it's something more serious, then obviously they're just gonna have to wait till the commission can meet.
All right.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.